that was another terrific adventure. And I'll be, you know, forever grateful for the way that Warren, my sort of partner in crime from Operation Anaconda, who maybe against his better judgment, I don't know, decided to come along for another adventure with me. The way that 3-7 Cav, treated us was fantastic. I mean, it's a balancing act when you're an embedded reporter, because you have to maintain enough professional distance and objectivity to be able to, write about what's happening and analyze what's happening, like I said, objectively. But at the same time, you in order to have that vantage point and to give the American people, that vantage point that you have in the middle of an invasion. You have to be with a unit in the invasion, and you can't help but, if they're well led, well trained, and if they're as they almost always are, good people, in the sense of being friendly, and that was certainly the case back then. I think it sort of tended to change as the Iraq War in particular ground on, but they were fantastic hosts, Warren and me. We were right in the thick of the action the whole way up to Baghdad, to the extent that during one sort of extended attempted ambush by, I guess they were the Fedayeen at that point, Saddam's Fedayeen troops. I had the experience. I was in a Humvee for most of the advance up, and until I think we crossed the Euphrates, and after that the order was all the soft-skinned vehicles had to stay behind, and it was just and Humvees had to stay behind, and everybody was in Bradleys then, or Abrams tanks. But I was during this ambush, my Humvee that I was in the squadron commander's Humvee, but the squadron commander wasn't in his Humvee. He was in his Bradley fighting vehicle, his Bradley cavalry fighting vehicle. And so he was actually immediately in front of us on the roadway, the highway that we were traveling on. And, we were sort of, 10 yards back in a Humvee, and it was his driver, the squadron's fire support officer, responsible for arranging all of the artillery and close air support fires to support the squadron commander's scheme of maneuver, and me. There was no fourth person in the Humvee, and we saw a bullet ricochet off the squadron commander's Humvee about 10 yards in front of us, which was literally sort of the plane that we were about to be going through in, a couple of seconds time. And so the driver shoulders his M16A2. These weren't even the days when everybody had M4s. This was an M16A2 rifle, and fired several bursts out of his window with his right hand while driving the Humvee with his left hand. So I thought that was reasonably impressive and certainly memorable. So it's the first thing I always think about in recounting the stories of the invasion that I personally experienced. We saw some A-10 gun runs during that, and just turning hedgerows into sort of flame. We saw, like I said, there was a lot of fighting. Again, very, very fortunately, nobody in the squadron task force, which was a big task force, that was in the low thousands of soldiers involved in that task force. Nobody was wounded during the move, the invasion phase of that. A lot of that has to go down to the skill of the commander, then Lieutenant Colonel, now retired Lieutenant General Terry Farrell, who was a terrifically talented, combat commander, and was really in his element as a cavalry officer in that period, in that invasion. I mean, there was so much stuff that happened, Luke, during that period, and it wasn't all positive. I mean, you see people getting killed, likely killed. I mean, not US soldiers, but nonetheless, it's or people who are dead, or badly wounded, or so forth. So I don't want to I don't want to make it sound like it was all just one jolly boy's own adventure. But it was a terrific experience for a reporter, and I'll always be glad that I'm grateful that I've had that experience. And it's funny, you talk about the danger. Danger comes in lots of forms, right? And it's not always somebody trying to shoot you, or in later years in Iraq and Afghanistan, the risk that the Humvee you're in is going to run over an IED or something like that. During the invasion, I mentioned that I was in this Humvee, and just to describe it, it was sort of not one of the more heavily up-armored Humvees, and sort of fairly lightweight, and it had sort of a luggage bay, if you like, in the back. It was almost a little bit like a pickup truck sort of thing, not quite, but and we had all of our big bags, the three of us, riding on the back of this Humvee. And it's the second night of the war. With the invasion had started in the middle of the night. So drove all day, didn't really encounter any significant resistance. And you're just driving across flat desert. That part of Iraq, it's not dune desert. It's flat, hard caked sand, little sort of desert plants. And then it gets into the next night, and the driver is wearing night vision goggles, which are quite tiring. They're both tiring on your head to wear, especially back then. They were quite heavy and sort of tiring to use. They sort of strain your eyes, or can strain your eyes a little bit, especially those earlier models. And somehow the parts of the task force ahead of us included a little engineer element that was supposed to mark the route and steer us clear of any big obstacles and things like that. And one of those obstacles was a wadi, a fairly deep wadi, like I said, a dried out riverbed. And they'd marked that out with white engineer tape on sort of traffic cones or something. But a whole lot of vehicles had driven past. Well, not that many, because we were fairly high up in the order of march, if you like, but you know, a cavalry troop, an armored cavalry troops worth of vehicles, plus some vehicles from the headquarters troop had, or the sort of the jump talk, as they would call it, the sort of the part of the headquarters that moves with the commander as he's leading the fight. But somehow between the engineer, the white tape getting fairly bedraggled and probably lying on the ground, and you know, maybe some over optimism as to how good their markings was on the part of the engineers, and some fatigue on the part of the driver, we missed the sign to turn right and don't keep going or you'll go off the wadi, right? And so I'm basically trying to doze off in what, you know, it was a very exciting part of you know, couple of weeks, but it was an extremely uncomfortable couple of weeks in the back of that Humvee, because there were we had sandbags at the bottom, so if we went over mines, that was supposed to afford you some protection. I'm not sure that would have been that effective, and I was surrounded by stuff, and you know, wearing seatbelts, fortunately still wearing seatbelts at that point in the war. And I was scrunched up and sort of trying to doze off, and then suddenly I was asleep, and then I came awake, and in a nanosecond, you know, as I realized that something was wrong. But I was trying, you know, I was trying to figure out what exactly is wrong. Why am I? And then, you know, a half second later, I was like, oh, I know what's wrong. This vehicle I'm in isn't in contact with the ground, you know. And what had happened was we had sailed off this wadi, the sort of the top of the bank of the wadi, and we were now in midair. You know, I'd love to tell you it was like a 30-foot drop, but it was probably, I don't know, 8 or 10 feet or something. It was pretty high, though. It's not something you want to be in a wheeled vehicle, or any kind of a vehicle, really going up over in midair. And then, of course, we hit the ground, boom, and we hit all four wheels pretty much at the same time. It was fortunate. The two guys in the front, the driver and the fire support officers, their heads, which were fortunately in helmets, cracked off the front perspex windshield of the Humvee, and for the rest of the invasion, it looked like there'd been 2 bullets entered there. There were 2 big spider patterns in the windshield. The sort of canvas type straps that had been holding the luggage in the back of the vehicle snapped, and all of that luggage came flying in over me. So I was sort of buried in the luggage in the back. But remarkably, well, very fortunately and remarkably, other than a couple of slightly sore heads for the 2 guys in front, none of us were hurt in the slightest. And even more remarkably, the Humvee started up and drove off again, which, you know, I always think that I missed a big payday by not being a spokesperson for AM General, which is I think the company that made the Humvee back then, because I was just amazed that you know, any normal wheeled vehicle should have just been a heap of wreckage after that, and this thing just kept on trucking. So that was that was, you know, people sometimes ask me, as you know, what's the most dangerous thing that moment in your reporting career? And look, you never know when some guy 200 yards away is thinking about firing his machine gun at you and then decides to fire it at somebody else instead. You never know when the Humvee you're in, like I said, drives 2 inches to the left or the right of a pressure plate IED that could blow you all to smithereens. But it would have been very easy to, it would have been very easy to just be seriously hurt or worse in a vehicle accident from a Humvee driving off of into a wadi by mistake. And to that end, I listened in sort of horror to the radio traffic when a Bradley during the same stage of the war, might even have been the same night, I don't know, went into a canal as part, not under fire or anything, just tipped into a canal. There are a lot of them in that part of Iraq, and several people drowned, in the back of that Bradley. And so, I mean, it's, you notice in as a reporter, I used to get all of the Pentagon press releases, and you can still find them online if you want to go to them. And there's a fairly large subset of deaths in combat theaters, and they generally announce every death of a service member in the combat theater that are from accidents. So there's that's another part of all of that. There's a lot of machinery moving. People are trying to get stuff done, get places faster, because it's a war and because it's combat and so forth, and things go wrong.